The air inside the warehouse carried the stench of rust and sour milk. Rows of iron cribs lined the concrete floor, filled with newborns swaddled in hospital rags. Their collective cries rose like a chorus against buzzing fluorescent lights. Daniel Cross crouched in shadows, ribs still broken from days before, blood clotting beneath his shirt. Lily Ward, dirt-streaked hoodie too big for her frame, pressed against his side with a child's determination disguised as steel. Rex, the shepherd, stood alert, amber eyes fixed on the movement between crates. The danger wasn't imagined. A knife pressed against Lily's ribs as a thug yanked her upright. Daniel froze, every nerve braced. The scarred brood called Cane Roar stepped into the light, broad frame blotting the scene. This wasn't just brutality, it was ideology. Children treated as currency, lives reduced to inventory. The war Daniel thought he'd survived had only sharpened into focus. Rex moved before thought, a blur of black and tan muscle tearing into flesh. The thug's scream split the air as the knife clattered across concrete, blood spraying into the stale light. Lily hit the ground, scrambling free on her knees. Daniel surged forward, every breath razoring through broken ribs. His Glock fired sharp bursts, each shot hammering steel and flesh alike. The infants wailed louder, terror echoing against the corrugated walls. Cane Roar didn't flinch. He strode forward, leather jacket creaking, scar twisting into a sneer. Daniel pressed his body into cover, shoulder screaming from recoil, vision tunneling. The shepherd snarled like a living engine, holding ground with primal certainty. The warehouse thundered with gunfire, smoke curling above the cages. This was no longer survival. It was a reckoning. Every bullet carried the weight of years of guilt and a promise not to fail again. The night had chosen its battlefield.
Cane moved like a storm made flesh, rifle steady, boots cracking across the floor. His eyes weren't wild, they were cold, convinced. He wasn't just a trafficker, he was a believer in cruelty, a man who thought children should be owned by the strong. Daniel's bullets grazed him but never slowed his advance. Lily clutched at the floor, her small frame barely beyond reach, her breath ragged. Cane's voice carried like scripture in steel halls, the cadence of a zealot promising dominion. Daniel's body screamed for collapse, but resolve stitched him upright. Across the chaos, Rex circled like a predator's shadow, hackles raised. In Cane's presence, the room felt smaller, oxygen stripped away. This wasn't an enemy built for arrest. It was a monster carved for war. In that moment, Daniel realized victory wouldn't be measured in justice served, but in who lived to breathe the next dawn. The first sound came faint, buried beneath rifles and screaming steel. Then it rose. Sirens splitting the night, louder than gunfire, sharper than Cane's orders. Red and blue lights bled through broken windows, painting the warehouse in fractured color. Cane's head snapped toward the noise, curse thick on his breath. He fired one last shot, then turned, slipping through a side exit like smoke through cracks. His men scattered, boots hammering concrete, bullets spraying with reckless aim. But the walls broke under a tidal surge of police. Officers stormed inside, rifles trained, precision snapping into place. One by one, the traffickers fell to knees or blood. Daniel sagged against a crate, chest heaving, weapon trembling in his grip. Lily ran to him, eyes bright with fear and relief, clutching Rex's fur as if it were rope. The warehouse settled into silence, broken only by the cries of children who had lived.
Hours earlier, silence had been broken by another kind of thunder. Train tracks hummed like veins of the earth, iron trembling beneath cold frost. Daniel lay chained to the steel, wrists shredded from struggle, face battered by fists that had spoken too clearly. Beside him, a newborn cried inside a wicker basket. breath fogging against the night. The horn began its long, merciless call, headlights stretching across the dark. Daniel twisted, ribs stabbing, blood choking his throat. He pressed against the basket, trying to shield what little life he could. The train loomed, unstoppable, a promise of steel against flesh. In those seconds, time bent. The infant's cries cut through everything, through exhaustion, through despair, through the weight of an old failure that had never left him. This was no ordinary night. This was the second chance carved from the edge of death itself. From the service road came the scrape of sneakers, the rush of smaller breaths. A figure broke into the light, a girl in a torn pink dress, hair tangled, fists clenched tighter than her frame allowed. Rex bounded ahead, paws tearing gravel, eyes burning amber. The shepherd's growl shattered the stillness, teeth flashing against metal. The girl didn't freeze. She fell to her knees, hands trembling but determined, working the cuffs that bit into Daniel's wrists. The latch was slick with blood, biting cold against her fingers. She pulled anyway, nails splitting, breaths shaking. The dog pawed furiously, biting at steel, muscles straining against what seemed unbreakable. The rails screamed louder as the train approached, the ground a drum beneath their bodies. Courage didn't announce itself that night. It arrived uninvited, barefoot, with a child's determination and a dog's unflinching instinct to fight.
The latch gave. Steel cracked open under desperate hands. Daniel rolled hard, dragging the basket with broken strength. Lily strained with him, small arms dragging the newborn just beyond the rail. Rex pushed with his shoulders, driving them into survival's narrow margin. Then the train arrived. Wind blasted, hot metal screamed, the ground split beneath the force. Dust tore from the earth like ash, air ripped from lungs, noise folding into the marrow of bone. They lay pressed against gravel, bodies curled around the infant, the shepherd braced like a shield. Seconds stretched into eternity, and then silence, heavy and absolute, fell across the night. The baby's cries returned first, fragile but alive. Daniel bled into the dirt, lungs screaming for breath. Lily clung to Rex, face streaked with grime and tears. Survival had been measured in inches, and inches had chosen to spare them. Silence after chaos is never pure. It carries echoes, reminders, the heartbeat of what nearly ended. Daniel dragged himself upright, ribs screaming, eyes fixed on the child beside him. Lily's breath came in broken gasps, but her fists were clenched with victory. The newborn's cries softened, warmth bleeding back into fragile limbs. Rex stood over them all, tail stiff, chest rising like a soldier at his post. No words passed between them. They were strangers an hour ago, bound now by iron and terror. Yet something deeper had taken root in that gravel clearing. In the aftermath of steel and thunder, 3 survivors had been carved into one unit. They weren't a family by name nor by law, but by survival. That night had written them into each other's lives with the ink of blood, fear, and a promise that none of them could turn away from.
Fluorescent lights painted the ceiling in pale squares above Daniel's bed. Machines whispered in steady rhythm, announcing life where death had nearly written its signature. Bandages wrapped his ribs, wrists raw with iron's memory, face bruised into a stranger's reflection. He lay still, but his mind didn't. Behind his closed eyes burned the glare of a train, the echo of a newborn's desperate cry, the weight of failure pressing harder than the wounds. Hospitals carry their own ghosts, antiseptic air layered with years of pain and survival. Daniel breathed them in, each inhale dragging guilt closer to the surface. He thought of Aurora,
the winter raid that had broken him once, the infant lost in silence. His body healed in fragments, but his mind was a battlefield with no end. The night had spared him, but it had not set him free. Soft footsteps entered, too light for a nurse, too hesitant for a doctor. Lily stood at the foot of the bed, hair combed but still uneven, freckles bright against pale skin. In her hands lay a faded blue scarf, edges frayed, a crooked daisy stitched into one corner. She placed it gently on the blanket, her eyes steady but carrying more weight than a child's should. The scarf wasn't fabric, it was memory. It had belonged to her mother, lost to the same world of shadows they were fighting now. Daniel's hand closed over it, bandages rough against the fragile cloth. The weight of it anchored him in ways medicine couldn't. It wasn't just protection, it was inheritance. The scarf passed from child to soldier, a bridge between two broken lives. In its threads lay not comfort, but a demand. Survive, no matter the cost.
Nurse Elena Ruiz adjusted the IV with practiced precision, her presence steady as stone. Lines etched her face, not of weakness, but of years spent refusing to collapse under exhaustion. She studied Daniel with eyes that had seen too many near deaths, too many men who didn't make it back. Her hands were firm, her words sharper than sympathy. She didn't offer comfort, she offered survival. Beside her, Lily lingered, silent, scarf still clutched in Daniel's grasp. Elena understood without asking. Children shouldn't carry talismans against death, yet this one did. The room filled with the quiet beep of machines, the shepherd's slow breathing at the foot of the bed, the scent of antiseptic woven into every thread. Healing wasn't forgiveness. Bandages closed wounds, but they couldn't erase scars carved deeper than skin. Survival was the only currency hospitals dealt in, and Daniel had paid for it in full. The scarf lay folded in Daniel's fist, its threads thin from years of wear, but its weight greater than any weapon he had carried. He studied it in silence, chest aching with each breath, ribs biting like glass under skin. The daisy stitched into its corner was crooked, imperfect but unyielding. It was a child's memory passed forward, a relic of love stolen too soon. For Daniel, it became more than cloth. It became oath. He would not fail again, not the child beside him, not the newborn still stolen into night, not the ghosts that haunted his conscience. Hospitals healed bodies, but symbols healed resolve. The scarf demanded a future not yet written, one where courage outlasted cruelty. In its faded blue, Daniel saw not comfort, but command. The command to rise, to fight, to carry the broken forward until none were left behind.
Winter, years earlier, had carried its own silence, sharper than bullets, heavier than chains. Daniel remembered the raid in Aurora, doors splintered under boots, rifles raised too late. The room smelled of bleach and sorrow, empty cribs scattered like accusations. One infant wrapped in a blanket had already slipped into stillness, its breath stolen by a network too efficient, too cruel. Daniel had stood frozen, Glock heavy in his hands, the world collapsing inward. Failure lodged itself deep in his chest that night, an ember that refused to burn out. Every case since had been haunted by that silence, every decision bent under its weight. Aurora was the wound no bandage could reach. It had carved him into a man of scars and obsession, unwilling to forgive himself. Now every newborn cry was both salvation and punishment, a reminder that one loss had already been too many. Aurora hadn't left Daniel broken. It had left him remade, forged in guilt and tempered in fury. That night, he swore an oath no badge could enforce, no court could measure. Never again. The words repeated in his marrow, shaping his every step, sharpening his resolve into steel. He carried the weight of one infant lost as if it were 1,000. Each case, Each lead, each sleepless night was payment against a debt he could never clear. But vows like his weren't made for peace. They were made for war. Aurora was the ghost whispering in every shadow, the reminder that hesitation kills, that mercy delayed is cruelty multiplied. The oath was not just survival, it was pursuit, it was vengeance, and it was carved deeper than bone. The man lying in the hospital bed wasn't recovering. He was sharpening, waiting for the next hunt.
The city spoke in symbols, chalked on bricks, scratched into paint, invisible to those who didn't know how to read. Daniel studied the marks carved into the abandoned house, triangles, slashes, crude shapes that meant nothing to trained officers, but everything to the underground. Lily's eyes caught them faster than his. She explained without words, her pencil scratching into her notebook, copying the lines with instinctive precision. These weren't random. They were maps, instructions, signals left for those moving stolen children through the city's veins. Daniel's gut tightened. The girl shouldn't know these codes, yet her hand didn't hesitate. She had lived among them, seen them, maybe even been marked by them once. The walls whispered of routes, of drop points, of a network that thrived in plain sight. The house reeked of sour milk and rust, its floorboards sagging with secrets. The city was speaking. They were listening. In the forested hills, a cabin leaned under years of rot and smoke. Clara Monroe lived inside, wiry frame bent by guilt, hair silvered by regret. Once a nurse, now a ghost of conscience, she welcomed them with trembling hands. The air smelled of antiseptic and wood fire. Bottles of rubbing alcohol cluttered her shelves like relics of sins she couldn't erase. She confessed with eyes more than words. She had fed the stolen infants, swaddled them, tried to comfort them before their fate, not out of malice, but out of weakness. She told herself it was better if she was there than someone worse. Daniel saw the fracture in her voice, the way she carried both shame and defense. Clara was not innocent, but neither was she beyond redemption. Her confession didn't clear her. It chained her, another link in a system built on silence.
The phone buzzed, sudden and violent against the silence of Clara's cabin. She snatched it up with shaking hands, voice dropping to a whisper. A man's tone answered, distant yet sharp, commanding without shouting. He asked if she had spoken. He reminded her that betrayal had a price. The name slipped from his words like a blade. The broker, the shadow behind everything, the architect of stolen innocence, a man who never needed to be seen to control the room. Daniel felt his chest tighten. The battle wasn't in front of him. It was above, beyond, in networks woven across cities. The broker's presence turned walls into ears, windows into eyes. Clara's hand shook as she dropped the phone, tears streaking her face. Outside, the forest pressed against the glass, thicker, darker. The broker didn't need to be in the room. He was already there. Rex stiffened, growl low and steady, ears pricked toward the window. Daniel's instincts followed, flashlight beams slicing across the room. The glass reflected their faces, but hinted at movement beyond. Branches snapped under weight too deliberate to be wind. Clara broke, sobs spilling into her hands. She wasn't paranoid. They were being watched. The forest felt closer, as if the trees themselves leaned in to listen. Lily clutched Rex's collar, her small frame pressed tight to his side, eyes wide but unflinching. Fear wasn't abstract anymore. It was inches away, waiting outside thin walls. Daniel's ribs ached as he steadied himself, Glock heavy in his palm. This was the broker's reach, silent, unseen, suffocating. Even in a cabin meant for confession, danger pressed in from all sides. Trust was fragile, walls were thin, and the night promised no sanctuary. Only vigilance. Only survival.
On the edge of the city, Sergeant Frank Hensley's shooting range rang with echoes of past wars. Daniel stood under his watchful eye, ribs bound, breath ragged, firing with precision born from scars. Frank had trained him years before, shaping discipline with iron hands. Now the mentor watched the man he had forged struggle against both wounds and ghosts. Lily stood behind safety glass, eyes fixed on Daniel's stance, absorbing every motion like scripture. Rex sat at her feet, tail curled tight, gaze flicking between both humans as if memorizing the ritual. Frank said little, but his silence carried weight. He knew what Daniel carried. He knew oaths like his didn't lead to peace, they led to battlefields without end. The sound of gunfire wasn't training, it was prophecy. Each bullet fired wasn't just practice, it was a promise that vengeance was drawing closer. Back in Daniel's apartment, maps sprawled across the table, red pins marking warehouses and symbols Lily had copied with obsessive precision. She sat cross-legged on the couch, hair falling across her face as she drew, her small hand unshaking despite the weight of what she was tracing. Daniel watched her with unease. She wasn't just helping, she was claiming her place. He told himself she was too young, too fragile, but her jaw carried the set of someone who had lived in danger longer than she should have. She had seen the symbols before, walked the streets where they meant safe or unsafe, lived by codes no child should need to know. She refused to stay behind. Her courage wasn't bravado, it was survival sharpened into instinct. Daniel realized then that pushing her away wouldn't protect her, it would only leave her fighting alone.
The shepherd paced the room, restless, ears swiveling with every sound outside. Lily's notebook lay filled with sketches of symbols, arrows, hidden codes. Daniel's maps showed routes converging on a warehouse near the rail yard. The plan formed not through orders, but through necessity. Daniel loaded his weapon with slow precision, scars tightening across his ribs. The scarf rested in his pocket, its fabric pressing against his chest like a second heartbeat. Lily packed her worn backpack with the same seriousness, sliding in a pencil, paper, and nothing more. Rex circled them both, a silent sentinel binding them into one pack. They weren't a family by law, but they were partners by survival. The night ahead promised fire, screams, and blood. Yet in the quiet before, they stood together, three against the dark, each carrying scars, each carrying hope, ready to strike. The city at night stretched like veins under dim streetlights. Daniel traced their route across cracked roads, warehouses looming like beasts along the rail yard. The map was no longer just paper, it was prophecy. Each pin marked not a building, but a memory waiting to be carved. Lily followed with her finger, matching symbols to locations, her notebook filling with arrows and crude sketches. She wasn't guessing, she was remembering. The scarf pressed into Daniel's chest as he folded the map, tucking both into his jacket. Rex sat by the door, tail stiff, eyes locked forward, ready before command. Outside, the air smelled of rust and oil, the city breathing its industrial rot. The hunt was narrowing. Every lead, every symbol, every risk pointed to one warehouse. The night was no longer waiting. It was here. The battlefield had chosen its coordinates.
The warehouse loomed at the edge of the rail yard, metal walls slick with oil, windows glowing faintly under flickering fluorescent lights. Daniel crouched low, ribs stabbing, Glock steady in his hands. Lily pressed beside him, backpack clutched tight, her eyes unblinking. Rex moved ahead, a shadow of muscle and instinct, nose twitching against the air. The door squealed open, sound splitting the night. Inside, the stench struck first, sour milk, rust and bleach. Then the sight. Rows of cribs stretched across the floor, iron bars holding infants wrapped in thin cloth, their cries weaving into a chorus of despair. Daniel's chest clenched, aurora burning inside his ribs. Lily covered her mouth, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. Rex whined low, pacing. This wasn't a warehouse. It was a slaughterhouse dressed as storage. The city's darkest secret sat in plain sight, alive,
fragile, waiting to be stolen. From the far shadows stepped Cain Roar, his frame towering, head shaved, scar carved from cheek to chin. He carried no hesitation, no doubt. His eyes were steady, his rifle lifted with certainty. Daniel knew this wasn't just muscle. Cain was conviction, a man who saw children as inventory, weakness as disease. Daniel raised his Glock, ribs stabbing, blood already soaking his shirt. Lily froze as a thug seized her, knife pressed against her side. Rex's growl filled the air, teeth bared, body rigid. The room constricted, fear choking oxygen. Cain smiled, scar twisting into mockery. He had the upper hand, the numbers, the shadows of a network watching. Daniel felt his heart hammer, not with fear, but with fury. This was the predator behind the tracks, the ghost behind Aurora. The enemy had a face now, and it was carved in steel and scar.
Chaos exploded. Rex lunged, fangs sinking into the thug's arm, blood spraying across steel. The knife clattered. Lily dropped, scrambling for cover. Gunfire tore through the air, Daniel firing between crates, bullets sparking against metal. Infants screamed louder, their cries shaking the walls with desperation. Amid the frenzy, Lily tore open her backpack, pulling out a battered flip phone. Her hands trembled, but her memory held steady. She pressed a sequence, the number etched into her mind. She didn't speak. She left the line open. Every scream, every gunshot, every cry bleeding into the receiver. On the other end, dispatch would hear the war. Daniel reloaded, shoulder shredded by a grazing shot, lungs ragged with fire. Cain advanced like a storm. But Lily's small hands had turned the tide, not with bullets, but with a single call that carried survival into the night. The warehouse shook with new thunder. Sirens wailed outside, engines roaring, boots slamming against asphalt. The side doors burst open, flood of officers storming in with rifles raised. Their precision cut through chaos. Gunfire sharp and controlled. One by one, Cain's men dropped, weapons clattering, screams swallowed by order. Cain roared, firing wildly, but the tide had turned. His scarred face twisted in fury, eyes burning with a promise of return. He didn't fall. He vanished, slipping through a side exit, swallowed by night. Daniel staggered, shoulder burning, ribs collapsing under weight. Lily rushed to his side, tears cutting through dirt, Rex pressing firm against him. The infant's cries continued, but softer now, lifted by arms that carried them toward safety. The war inside the warehouse ended, but Cain's escape carved a darker truth. Battles could be won. Wars demanded more, and the night was far from finished.
The warehouse emptied under flashing lights, the scent of smoke and rust clinging to the air. Officers cradled infants, murmurs of reassurance weaving between sirens. Daniel sat slumped against a crate, vision blurring, scarf clenched in his blood-stained fist. Lily pressed close, Rex steady at her side, the three of them bound tighter than before. Victory felt hollow. The children were alive, but Cain was still free. The broker's shadow stretched farther than the warehouse walls, deeper than the city's veins. Daniel breathed through broken ribs, chest heavy with both relief and dread. Survival carried its own weight, the knowledge that the storm had only paused, not ended. The night had spared them again, but the war raged on unseen. In silence, under the hum of ambulances, 3 survivors sat bound by blood, scars, and a promise that no shadow would swallow them willingly. Days later, the courtroom filled with murmurs and glares, the air thick with judgment. Reporters scribbled, foster parents clutched seats, officers stood in rows. At the front, traffickers, chained in iron, faced the verdict. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder, words heavy as stone. Guilty. The chains rattled as the condemned were led away, their scowls powerless against judgment. Daniel sat in the gallery, ribs bound, shoulders stiff, scarf folded in his hand. Lily sat beside him, her small fingers wrapped around his arm, Rex curled at their feet. Justice echoed through the room, but its sound was incomplete. Cain's scarred face wasn't among them. The broker's shadow didn't bow to gavels. The world saw victory. Daniel felt only pause. Justice was real, but incomplete, fragile as glass. The war they had entered would not end under fluorescent lights. It lived beyond the courtroom doors.
On the edge of Denver, a modest house stood, white siding chipped, porch swing creaking under spring wind. Daniel opened the door to bare rooms filled with dust and echoes. Lily darted through them with laughter that cut years off her scars, her small frame exploring each corner as if testing the shape of belonging. Rex padded close, tail wagging, nose pressed to forgotten furniture. The house shifted as they moved through it, silence chased away by footsteps, by laughter, by hope. Daniel stood in the doorway, scarf folded in his pocket, breath easing in a way it hadn't in years. This wasn't victory. It was a fragile reprieve, a shelter carved from storm. For the first time in decades, he felt tethered not to duty, but to something human. They weren't bound by blood. They were bound by survival, and survival was enough to call home. Spring sunlight painted the porch in gold, Lily's laughter carrying across the yard as she chased Rex through grass. Daniel sipped coffee, ribs still aching, but lighter now, watching as the shepherd bounded like a pup, as the child laughed like someone who finally belonged. The scarf lay folded beside him, daisy crooked but steadfast, a symbol carried through fire. Peace whispered in the air, fragile, precious. But peace is never permanent. Across the street, an engine idled, unseen behind tinted glass. The sound was faint, but enough to stir Rex. His ears pricked, growl rising low in his chest. Daniel's gaze lifted, instincts coiling tight. The storm wasn't finished. Cain was still free. The broker was still watching. The porch creaked under the weight of both laughter and dread. For every beginning carved in light, shadows waited, and shadows never forgot.